Do you have the knowledge to work with the next generation of refrigerants? ESCO Institute can help you learn the information you need with the low GWP A2L refrigerant safety course. Did you know newer refrigerants are less harmful to the environment? Did you know there are new standards for the transportation of low GWP refrigerants? Did you know most A2L equipment will require refrigerant detection systems, and you will be required to use no spark, no arc tools and equipment? Get the facts! These are just some of the things you need to know to work on new equipment. Take the online course to learn more. The ESCO Institute Low GWP A2L Refrigerant Safety course is interactive and engaging and will prepare you for the Low GWP A2L Refrigerant Safety Certification exam. You will find the Low GWP A2L Refrigerant Safety course on the HVACR Learning Network, the industry's leading source of online and digital content. Visit hvacr.elearn.network today.
Thank you all for joining us. We're so grateful that you're hanging out with us today. We definitely want to know where you're joining us from. Patrick Murphy from Jersey Shore. Perla's hanging in with us today as well. Hi, Perla. So let us know where you're joining from. And if you have any questions along the way, definitely let us know in the chat. So we're going to dive a little deep into communication skills this week. So I'm being joined by Angie Snow. Angie, how are you doing?
I am doing great. Glad to be here. Thank you.
It's going to be a lot of fun. Ty Branaman, how are you, sir?
Doing fantastic. We got lots of rain.
Yeah, you guys had quite the flood down in Texas. And, with the ground being so dry, it's easy for that to just run off and create chaos. So glad things are starting to recuperate there. Angie, where are you joining us from?
I am joining here from my home office in Utah. So we're still having some 80-degree days, but on through. Doing good.
Yeah, fantastic. So I'm joining just outside of Indianapolis, Indiana in Brownsburg. And so when we start talking about communications, these are two of my favorite presenters when we talk about how to communicate with people in general. And so we're going to dive into communication skills. And I want us to be thinking about communication from a slightly different perspective. If we look at our classrooms, we have a variety of generations in the classroom because we have new students coming through. We have people that are transitioning from different careers. We have people who are coming back for new education for the transitions that we're making in refrigerant and technologies. So we have a lot of different people from different demographics and ages that are joining us in the classroom. Now, if we look at this chart just for a second, now let's think about a majority of the educators in the industry. I myself will recognize with a Gen X. I was born in 76. No one has to tell us what year you're born in, maybe just the generation that you recognize with. Ty, how about you?
I am definitely Generation X. That is hardcore, solid all the way.
And Angie?
Well, I guess that makes tic-tac-toe, 3 X's in a row. So
exactly. And so all of you that are joining us in the chat, let us know what generation that you feel like you represent, the generation that you have grown up with, because it's going to be important when we start talking about communication skills. I have a feeling a lot of us educators are going to say that they're probably in that Gen X range, right? We've had a lot of people retire, especially due to COVID. We have a lot of younger generations that are moving into the classroom. We've even seen some Gen Y and borderline Gen Z educators at the conference, right? So we have not just new educators, but we have new students coming into the classrooms. And a lot of times we speak slightly different languages, I would say. We speak the same English, we maybe speak foreign languages together, but the way that we communicate is very different through different generations. And so I know for myself, oh yeah, go ahead, Ty.
I have a quote right here, and let's see if anybody knows when this quote was made. And the quote is, "Labor is scarce, high, and very unreliable. Nobody wants to work for wages." What do you think the year was for that quote?
I would say 2023.
All right, and Snow.
I'm gonna say maybe back to like 2015.
1905.
Oh my goodness.
1905. I have another quote from 1922, 1937, 1938. Here's Miss Tollison. Today's children are spoiled by spending spending too much and too many goings. 1938, faced with the labor shortage of when unemployment is widespread, nobody wants to work anymore. That's 1937. So we hear this and we forget that our generation said that, the generation before us said that. I remember my grandfather saying that about my generation. So when we hear that, it's not true. It's just simply a disconnect between how, our experiences where we are and a lot of times reality it's happening. But that quote is nothing new. It's been around for over 100 years.
Exactly. So when we start thinking about that and we start working with new generations of students, oftentimes we have to step back and ask ourselves, is it the generation that is challenging, or am I challenging myself to communicate with a new generation? That was tough for me, right? And so we're going to work on some best practices today to incorporate communication skills into the classroom. And I want us to be thinking about who we are and who we see in the classroom, because one of the really interesting conversations that Howard Weiss and I have had is about when we're recruiting into the industry, who are we recruiting? Oftentimes, we're recruiting people that look like us. And to be able to make our industry successful, we have to start being more open and more realistic of the people that are interested in our field, and to understand that we really have to challenge ourselves to think outside of our typical marketing, our typical education, and start looking at people from a much broader perspective and look at the way that they have learned themselves. So, all right, let's regroup on the whole generational side. A lot of us have identified with generations that we grew up in, and in Generation X, we can see that there's pretty significant amount of the workforce is Generation X. A lot of us use personal computers. A lot of us use email and text, and a lot of us like to use online communication, kind of like we're doing right now, right? So is that the norm? Well, that is not necessarily the norm for the entire world. If we start thinking about other generations, let's just pick on Generation Y for a minute, right? Generation Y likes to have face-to-face communications. Generation Z, they actually use a variety of digital sources for communication. And one thing that we do find, particularly with like Gen Z enjoys communication with a physical face, whereas Gen Y wasn't as concerned about that. They were just happy sending text messages, and they didn't have to have a physical face in front of them. But what we're starting to see, and particularly once we move into alpha and we start learning more about alpha, you're going to find that alpha actually appears a little bit more like the maturest in the fact that they enjoy face-to-face communication and they enjoy interacting with people. And so there's a lot of misperceptions, just exactly like you said, Ty. We may perceive that they're not hardworking because they may work differently than us. And that's the obstacles that we have to get past. So let's think about things for a little bit from a workforce perspective. Now, this is a hard one for me to swallow sometimes. So if we look at it from a workforce perspective, currently we're right before that 2025 demographic, showing that the baby boomers are starting to retire. We have less of them in the industry. There's a fair amount of us, but there's actually a majority of Gen Y in the workforce, and Gen Z creeping through quickly, and Gen Alpha, there's going to be right behind them. And so knowing our audience is very, very critical in how to actually communicate with them, because there have been some changes in education over a period of time. Now, Ty's done classes specifically on Gen Z. I've tied this class to specifically Gen Z, but I don't really want us to tie it just to straight Gen Z. I want us to think about this a little bit broader. So when we look at communication, let's think about ways communication has changed, right? If we look at tools for communication, Ty, we talk about using instruction in the classroom. For Gen Xers, we didn't use a lot of digital communication in the classroom growing up. It didn't feel norm at all.
It was not.
As we start moving into new eras of technology for installation, commissioning, and diagnostics, it's even more important to start utilizing in those classrooms. So either one of you have examples of ways that we're starting to interact with our classes and interact with educators better with digital communication.
Yeah, well, I'll kick that off. I have 3 children who are Gen Z, and the youngest of those is a senior in high school right now.
Mhm.
And each of them have had a Chromebook all throughout high school. I mean, the
Yeah.
thought of that back when we were in high school was kind of silly. Like, I remember taking a word processing
Yeah.
class and just trying to get familiar with computers and understanding how computers worked as a Gen X. But this is natural for them. They do all of their homework on a Google
A
Chromebook.
digital device. Yeah.
They don't even do, like, their handwriting is atrocious because they never have to use it because everything is digital for them. And so keeping that in mind as we're designing courses and we're assigning things, how, this is their norm. Writing is hard for some of them because they haven't had to do a lot of writing. A
Isn't
lot of
it
their
crazy to think about?
Yes, their homework has all been done. Or my son will get out his phone and do all of his homework. I'm like, "What? Get off of your phone and get your homework done." He's like, I am doing my homework right now.
Right
I'm like,
now.
really? That is
Yes.
really strange. But the fabulous thing about that is, as an 18-year-old senior in high school, he has actually been installing for me this all summer long at my HVAC company, and he's a fabulous. He's caught on so much, and I think we're going to go into different learning types in a moment. But
Mhm.
they learn by watching it be done. They see the doing, they pick it up, and it's so easy for them to pick things up because they can YouTube anything. Oh, I'm stuck on this process in the installation. Let me YouTube that really fast and see if I can find out how to do it. Like, they're able to move quicker, because of all of these things we didn't have available back then. And so the learning strategies have to be different because they're learning differently.
Okay.
So if you thought,
I completely agree with that.
Yeah. So Ty, when we think about, we get into this conversation of, do I teach on mechanical instruments, mechanical gauges? Do I teach on digital instruments using smart apps? Right. Kind of falls back into that same conversation. When we think about introducing the technologies, we have to understand the technologies that each demographic grew up with. So I'm going to skip past a couple of these slides. Like I said, I can tend to spend a lot of time talking about how they like to communicate. But one thing that most people don't understand is that we've actually done some changes in the way that we design curriculum in the last few decades. As Gen Xers, we grew up with a curriculum that we recognized as linear. And this was a tough one for me to swallow as an educator because I myself have got a Gen Z and I would say an alpha. So I have one that is a junior in high school. I'd say she's right in that alpha range, alpha to Z. And so when we started breaking down education and understanding how learners receive information, it became very apparent that we actually started transitioning the way we design curriculum in the 1990s. We had previously, all 3 of us grew up with a linear design. So, what is a linear design of construction for curriculum? That's when we start from a very, very basic fundamental and we walk through a chapter 1 and we complete an assignment physical for that chapter and we complete an assessment for that chapter, and we cannot move on to chapter 2 until we've completed chapter 1. Does that sound familiar to the 2 of you?
mm-hmm.
So I brought that up to, at the time, 13 and 17-year-olds and went, okay, I'm torn because I have instructors that are having a difficult time teaching students your age. And I got a feeling it's in this nonlinear or modular educational design that we had changed in a lot of schools. And says, "Oh, let me tell you, let me explain to you how I learned something." And I went through this entire sequence, like a sequence of operation, that we went from chapter 1 content to chapter 1 assessment to then chapter 2, and you went very sequentially until you got to the end, and at the end you understood what this topic was. And they both looked at me with a smirk and they went, "That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life." And I went, "Really? Well, tell me about this, because this is where I'm struggling, and I think a lot of other instructors are struggling with." They're like, can I learn it? And why can't I just learn it in pieces? And if I already know something, why can't I just take a test and move on with it and be able to focus more of my effort on the things that I don't know? And I went, oh, well, that's intriguing. And they're like, was your books written that way? I said, well, yeah, all of our books were written that way. And like, our books are not written that way. And we can take tests throughout the year anytime we want to. If we miss a test, we can make it up later and we can continue on with our progress. I'm like, okay, I need to test this because right now this is a theory and I need to prove this. So what I did was I took a topic that doesn't change significantly over time. So I took some math books and I started looking at the construction of math curriculum. So I open up a book from the 1950s and I find a complete linear sequential development. You learn this and you're not going to learn this until you're good at this. Plain and simple. So a very linear construction. 1960s, we changed some colors, but the actual content was still the same, where you learned in a very direct linear construction. Into the 1970s, we had the same content. The 1980s, we might have gotten a little crazier with colors and designs, but the content was laid out the same way. By the 1990s, we started moving a little bit. And by the 1990s, we started breaking things out more into segments and into chapters so that the one big book was now a variety of smaller books. And depending on what you were good at, you could separate and go that particular direction in math by high school. So if we step back in the 1980s, you just took math all the way through. And wherever you stopped, you stopped. By the 1990s, you might have been better at analytics. And so you might have spent more time in analytical geometry, or you might have liked trigonometry. And so you could actually take classes that were separated out into different segments. And what I found really intriguing, by the time I got into the 2010s and into the early 2020s, what we found was that all of the content was now separated out into different delivery methods. You could get that information digitally in a digital book. You could get that in an e-learning course. You could get that in physical books, but you could also do those broken in different segments. And as long as you completed those segments by the end of that semester or the end of that period, it was the same as learning it in a linear, but you actually learned it at your own pace. And we eliminated books. So I don't know about you, Angie, but none of my kids actually carry books today.
No, they don't. And my background is education. I used to be an elementary teacher. I got my master's in math education. And so this is fascinating to me because we've got, I have neighbors now. I was just talking to one last night that's like, I do not understand this new way they're teaching our kids math. It's this new Common Core. There's blocks, there's boxes. I don't get it. And really what it does is they're breaking it down and teaching it in so many different methods for different types of learners. But there is no book. There is no reference point. Like, where do we go to, us Gen Xers, we're like, where's the book? And I can go back and reference it and I can reteach you and help you with this. But parents don't have that now. And a lot of them are like, I don't know how to help my kids because they're Googling it now, trying to figure it out because there are no books. So you're absolutely right. It's very fascinating.
It is. It's one of my favorite topics to discuss with educators because I was completely oblivious until I sat down with my children and showed them how I learned, and they laughed and went, "That's the most ridiculous thing ever." I was like, "Okay, here's an example. Let me give you an example. So I want to teach you how to do something, and I'm going to teach you how to use a blender. And we're going to start at the very fundamental of what a blender is. And I'm going to walk you through chapter of how every part of this blender is made, the purpose for everything that is here. And then by the end, you're going to get to turn the blender on and see what it actually does." And they both went, "Why would I even want to do that? Why couldn't you just show me that the blender operates and then intrigue me so that I'll go back and understand all of the different pieces that made that blender work?" And I went, "I love that idea." They're like, "Well, that's how we learn." And I'm like, wait a minute. In every class? Well, yeah, every class. We know where we're going to get to at the end, right when we begin. And I'm like,
This is how I teach blower motors. We have a whole bunch of blower motors that we had from scrap, and we'd take them out there and say, "Okay, we want you to pull these motors out." And they would struggle with it, and they would, all these. Sometimes somebody would figure it out, but typically they're struggling with it, and it just becomes a big mess. And I was like, and they keep asking me, "Well, how do we do this?" It's like, I'm not going to tell you. We're just going to play around with it. And then finally, when everybody's frustrated, and everybody's like, "You have to tell us. You're the teacher." I was like, "Oh, so you're asking me to show you these steps." And then so we went back in the class, let's make some notes. First, we're going to do this, and then we're going to do that. Now they understand the importance of those step-by-step things. And then they took it out to the lab. They followed those steps and just knocked it completely out. And then they got the how to get the right information, putting the set screw on the flat, like all these things that were so important. But we did that first, like let them struggle with it first. They got their hands on it, and now they're like, look, I'm asking for help now. So instead of me telling them how to do something, they
empowering.
wanted me to tell them how to do it.
Okay. So let's let that all sink in for a minute, because that is incredibly important when we start talking about the design and construction of curriculum. Because I can think about myself, if I was a student in that class and we were doing this motor class 20 years ago, the class that I would have been in would not have showed you a motor until you got to the end. And then you might have had the opportunity to actually work on a motor. And I know for myself, I relook at the way we're delivering content today, and I would prefer myself to have at least had the opportunity to figure that motor out first, and then go back and fill in all of the blanks with the information that I don't know. And that's really what we're doing with a modern curriculum. So it makes us rethink how we deliver the content. Now, it's not the change of content. HVAC is still HVAC. We're still teaching the same principles. We just now have the opportunity to deliver them in different ways so they can be received better by our students in ways that they will understand it. Because I will tell you, Gen Z are some of the best problem solvers that we have encountered in generations, right? So let's think about some ways we can introduce some additional digital technology into the classroom, ways to be able to promote technology to help solve these problems. Let's just say it was that motor. Is there any reason we can't bring in animations in 3D and bring in tools to use in the classroom? Right? So let's talk about digital tools for a second. We have a lot of educators at the conference saying, I'm not going to teach digital tools. I'm going to teach it the old way because that's the way that you have to learn. And I would say, absolutely, you have to learn. But why can't you intrigue that student and give them an app and give them tools that you have already set up right from the get-go so they can see what the data is and the information is, and then go backwards back into the classroom and explain every piece of that?
Well, I think a great example of that is when I was in school, we had to do all this long math and we had to show our work and list everything out. And I was always saying, why can't I use the calculator? And it's, well, you're not always going to have a calculator with you. And well, they lied because I always have a calculator with me all the time. And I'm big on using apps because I get numbers mixed up. I get them reversed out of sequence. So for me, having an app that does these calculations for me not only makes it faster for me, it also gives me a more accurate number at the end. And
Yep.
I've very much adopted into using the apps, and I grew up in a very analog world. So if I can do this, I know everybody listening can do this as well.
Yeah.
Angie, in the classrooms, when did you see this changing in your classrooms to start utilizing more tools in the classroom?
Well, I stopped teaching in the public school system about 2006. And at that time, we were still fairly new. There were not a lot of apps. I mean, social media was just introduced shortly after that. I think there still was a lack there. But as I've been training more adults now and seeing how how people are adopting apps. For example, the Kahoot, that is a really popular one, and lots of kids are familiar with that because teachers use that. I feel like it's been a slow adaptation for teachers. As soon as they see it, they're like, okay, how can I use this? Because what we're seeing, and I think this said this in some of your previous slides, is Gen Z really has a lower attention span. Things have always been so immediate and so quick and moving so quickly for them that they tend to lose their attention more easily. And so it's finding ways to keep them engaged, and apps, games, things where they can be hands-on, they can see the parts, they can see it. Like you said, if we went back and taught it the old way from beginning to end, they would be so bored. Their heads would be, they would be like my son and put in their AirPods and tune out, because it's not a valuable use of their time for them, right? It's going over things that may not be as effective. So I really like, I love this, and I feel like the more we can be aware of what's available and start incorporating it, even if it's just one thing at a time, it's going to keep our students more engaged.
Yeah, that's one of the big questions that we get at the conference is how do I engage with my students, because they're just their attention span is nil. And we go, well, that's because they have a different learning skill than we developed.
Right.
And so yes, we have adapted to using technology, but our Gen Z and Gen Alpha and a lot of our Gen Y actually grew up with technology in their hands even as children. And so we as educators must be able to start picking up new tools and implementing tools into the classroom. I had one educator that was struggling with his youngest students, keeping them involved. And I said, let me challenge you to this. I know you don't want to put gauges and refrigerant and electronics and electrical and into their hands in the very first semester, but I'm going to challenge you to do this. I'm going to challenge you to take one of your pieces of equipment, install all of the digital tools that you have on that piece of equipment, allow them in class to download the app that you direct them to use, walk around and make sure, because it's super easy. If every screen is the same, you know they're doing what they're supposed to do. And so you would have them download the app. This is in the very first week of class. Download an app, let them connect one at a time to the piece of equipment, see that it is moving and functioning, and then step back and go, now we're going to learn what you just seen. And so you have the ability to capture their attention in a way that they recognize. They're willing to go backwards and learn from the Stone Age techniques as long as they know that it relates to the technology that they're accustomed to. He came back this last year, that was 2 years ago, came back this year. He's like, that was it. He says, I don't teach them the technology until way late into the second semester, but I've been showing them up front, and a lot of them have went home and learned it on their own way ahead of time. I'm like, okay, so now we have changed the way we deliver content. We give our students the opportunity to learn in a way that they're comfortable with. They're still learning all of the content. They're just able to do it from a different delivery perspective. So it's a lot of success when we re-look at the delivery. The content hasn't changed, just like those math books. They didn't change a lot. Even when we reorganized the way we delivered it, it was still the same content. All right. So helping delivery, step one. Step two, now it's an opportunity to rethink about collaborating in the classroom. I mean, when we had classes, we always had opportunities to be able to collaborate. At least I did. A lot of my classes had the opportunity to collaborate and then come together as a project. And I've noticed in a lot of our classrooms, we don't do that in HVAC programs. We tend to have assignments, and we tend to have one-on-one learning opportunities or small group opportunities. But in that time frame that we're working with a smaller group of people, we don't always have these larger group assignments, and we should. So let's take, for instance, that one using the applications. I can actually take a small group, because remember, we're going to be working hands-on with a smaller group of students, but we're going to have a larger group of students still in the classroom. We can now use these apps to be able to work on pieces of equipment, hands-on with people, but yet show people simulations of the exact same thing that we're working on. So if we have a simulator that is creating the exact same scenario that we're doing physically, we are preparing students for their next stage, their next sequence, their next group of learning skills. And so for us, it's a matter of stepping back and looking at the tools that allow us to do that. Apps are one, but we also have a lot of simulators that we can use as well. I keep thinking a lot about Dirk Nauman's HVAC simulators that are tabletop simulators that we can actually use curriculum for and walk over to a piece of equipment and have a similar function to it. Ty, you're always building things for classrooms, so you have multiple things to work on. If I was going to show someone how to go work on a compressor, what could we have sitting on the table for the other group? Maybe a whole cluster of cutaway compressors, right? So utilizing our classrooms, giving them collaboration opportunities, projects to work on while we're actually doing our hands-on is a great way to engage the classroom. Now, and step 3 I always talk about is when we start talking about our younger generations, we have to be much more aware of diversity and inclusion. And so that is something I've been working on personally, and it's been a struggle. It truly has. So my children have helped me understand that from a much larger perspective than I was taught in school. So when I was in school, Howard and I talk about this all the time of the trades were like the other thing that you did when you weren't going to go to college, right? And it still has some of that stigma. Well, now we're starting to have generations looking at our industry because our industry has an impact on the environment around us. Going, while that is a job, that is a career that is stable, provides lots of income, and I get to make a difference in the world. And so now we have a variety of demographics that are coming to our industry going, this is very intriguing. And Angie, this is kind of the world you live in. You're promoting people to think outside of some of these traditional boxes and be aware of the opportunities and advantages in the trades.
Absolutely. I feel like there's a really big focus on celebrating diversity right now and finding ways to uh, make an impact by doing that. Inclusion is so important. People, especially this generation, they need to feel a part of it. One thing that stops people from moving forward in a lot of ways, especially in this generation, is, do I belong here? And we see that especially with a lot of women in the industry. As part of Women in HVAC, we're constantly hearing from female technicians like they just don't get it. They're not accommodating. We're having to do these things. And so, I hear a lot of complaints from women in the industry. And, but at the same time, I get a lot of people coming to me from schools saying, how do I get more female students? How do we get more women into this industry? And it starts with, talking about it, putting women in your marketing materials, putting women in everything that you're doing, celebrating the women that are there, but not pointing them out and we don't want to overemphasize, you're a girl. You're like, girls don't like that either. They just want to be seen as equal. And that's the E in DEI, equality. We're all equal. And so celebrating each individual's differences versus just focusing on gender or race or ethnicity is really, really important.
Yeah, because when we think about the 1980s and even into the early 1990s, like Ty, when you and I were, developing into the trades, it was kind of the accepted norm that you were a white male in a white male industry. That was pretty much it. And so we seen ourselves as this is who I am. This is the career path that I will take because people like me take this career path. And even though it was a great career path, unfortunately, there was this stigma that you need to be this kind of person to have this career path. And then now, as we start looking at the world much broader than we were taught generations ago, we start realizing that there's so much opportunity within our industry. Why wouldn't it be appealing for people to look at our industry and go, I'd really like to be a part of that, but I'm not being accepted as part of that because that likes to look like this. And so that has been changing, especially on this last decade or so. And so as instructors, that is a challenge for us sometimes, is to relook at our classroom and understand that it's okay if someone doesn't look like me. They're here because they want to learn and they want to do the same thing that I like to do. And then when we get past that barrier, we become a true mentor to minds. And then it also broadens our scope of communication in ways that I know personally I'd never thought that I would need to grow in. And once I started growing in that, then I started communicating much better, especially with the younger generations. When I was willing to be able to think outside of the box that I kind of got stuck in my industry, and being willing to change, it actually broadened my communication skills. And so I hadn't thought about diversity and inclusion as communication. But when you realize the importance of it, when you first see that and you see that change, you go, wow, I just communicated with someone that I didn't know that I could comfortably communicate with. Because that's one of the questions we get. How do I communicate with people that I don't have any experience communicating? What if they come to me and they have a very strong accent because they're from another country? And I'm struggling because I'm not communicating in a language. And when you step back and you understand that it's just a little something extra we have to work with personally and professionally. And when we break that barrier, now we've made a communication commitment with the student, and it develops from there forward. So yeah, I think I could spend an entire show just talking about diversity and inclusion and how much that has changed in our industry and evolving. All right, another one that we talk about. We're on a very lengthy conversation today with the Department of Energy talking about transitions in the industry and how we can actually show our industry to a generation that is grown up with technology and looking for different skills. So when we're teaching all of our fundamentals, we have to understand that fundamentals are always going to be in our industry. The things that changes are the ancillary items, the inputs, the outputs that make the fundamentals function better or more efficiently. And so, oh yeah, go for it, Ty. I see something brewing there.
So this is an owner's manual for a 1942 Hudson. All right. So I know there's got to be some car people out there. I mean, isn't that
Mm-hmm.
a cool looking car? I mean, that is
Love it.
stylish right there. I love old stuff. I have all of my old tools,
Mm-hmm.
but a lot of times we get hung up into romanticizing the past because we connect to it and we remember things a lot of times more positively than they were. Now this vehicle was before my time, and I'm looking through this manual and it's like the warranty was 90 days or 4,000 miles. We talk about um, do not exceed 40 miles per hour for the first 250 miles. Do not
Wow.
exceed 50 miles per hour for at 250 to 500 miles. It talks about changing the oil in the clutch bearing, the throwout bearing. Like
Wow.
there's all of these. You had to change all these parts. You had to change in service, and very short instruments. And now you can go what it's like 100,000 miles on a spark plug or more.
Mm-hmm.
And we see these things in the past that we are familiar with, we're comfortable with. But if we really look at the details, man, it's still an engine, but look at how much technology has changed in a vehicle. And I look today and what we have, and I grew up with the gauges and all of the older stuff that's now considered painfully antiques. But now I've adapted over to new technology like checking airflow. Like it's now we have things that can do that so much faster than ever before. So yeah, the science of refrigeration is still the same. We're still absorbing heat from one place and putting it to another place, but the technology is changing. And I'm sure there are some great mechanics that worked in these, but we don't have this anymore. Now we have electronics and computers that do that same thing more effectively, more efficiently, and safer. And that's what we have to realize in the trade is things have changed from the days of this, right? Now we have technology, inverters, and people say, I hear this all the time. I don't like that new stuff. It's irrelevant. Like it's nobody asked me what the industry should do. Here's what's happening. And I either learn about it or I get left behind. And you can be mad about it and learn about it. You can wait till you're forced to learn about it, or you can learn about it ahead of time. And that's one thing we have to do is we have to adapt to the technology, not just for ourselves, but in the classroom, we have to adapt to it because it's our responsibility to pass this information on and prepare this new generation for what they're going to be working for. So even if we don't like this stuff, by using our own personal preferences of not including it in the classroom, we are hindering that next generation coming out. So not only are we not preparing them, we're actually hindering them. I've seen instructors say, I refuse to teach anything other than analog. Like, you are literally hurting that person. There's been instructors that say they refuse to teach the new refrigerants that is going to be here. And to me, that's just appalling. As if we're going to be instructors, we have to be learning just as much as the students are learning. And if we get to the point where we're like, I refuse to learn anything new, we need to step out of that classroom because it's now become a toxic place for the generation that needs that information. I know that sounds harsh,
I know.
but
There's a lot of
it's the
people. I'm
truth.
going to get some emails on that one, I'm sure, but it'll be okay. We're here to support you, even though it's uncomfortable. We have to change. We have to be able to teach technologies that our students are looking for. We have to be able to show the industry for what it actually is. And so if you're an educator and you're struggling with any of these steps, it's okay. We are here to support you and to give you the tools for this. If you're struggling with any of these, we highly encourage you to join us at the National HVACR Education Conference. You're going to get deep dive classes on any and all of these topics from industry professionals to help get a little bit closer to what those students are expecting. Because we went generations without our industry really changing much. And so unfortunately, the classes didn't change very much. And now we're in an age of transition. And so as instructors, we as well are in an age of transition so that we can keep up with the modern workforce.
Last year at the conference, there was people that have been doing air conditioning longer than I have been alive. And they were there learning new things, learning new technology, adapting to it. And that is the big difference. Like, if you have to keep learning, and there's people there that was over 90 years old, still there learning this new stuff that comes out. And that is inspiration. That's how we have to be. We have to be on that learning side.
Yeah, it's absolutely fantastic to see. So it's okay. Even if these are all pain points, I don't expect everyone to love every one of these slides, but I want you to know that we are here to help you get through these and to be more comfortable with these. And if you have any suggestions and recommendations in the chat, please have at it. We're here for you as a conversation. Step 5. Okay. So flexibility and independence is another thing that has changed. And a lot of instructors like for things to be this way because this is the way I learned it and this is the way that it has to be. And as we start relooking at our classroom, sometimes we have to be a little bit more flexible in our content. One of the reasons that here at ESCO, we create content in multi-form delivery. Like, take the low GWP safety course that you can do in book, you can do in classroom presentation, you can do an e-learning course, right? All because we have the ability now to deliver the content in different ways to cater to the needs of our students. What if I have a student that can't be in class for the PowerPoint presentation on the low GWP? Can we assign that as homework for them in a different way for them to be able to deliver it and receive it? Absolutely. Much of our content is now being constructed to be able to be done at home. I highly encourage educators to do videos in your classes of the important topics and things that you feel are absolutely required in that classroom. Do videos on those and have those available to your students if for reasons that they can't actually be in the class, so they can actually learn and be prepared. I mean, Ty, I think about your videos. Every video that you produce really is you in a classroom, in front of a classroom. It's pieces that you can go back and study on later of exactly what you would learn in the class. And so a few years ago, I did a class on how to build your own digital content, how to build your own library of videos. And I've had a lot of educators after that come back and go, that's the best thing I ever did. Because if I forget something, all I got to do is just assign them a video. So, very crucial to start, thinking about different ways to deliver our content.
Yeah, and I just to add to that, I think you bring a great point of, documenting it as best as you can, especially through video, because Gen Z, they consume more video than any other generation. right? Like this is what they do. They're on their phones a lot. They're on YouTube more. Like they are consuming more information by video than any other generation. And so to have these videos available, and then when they have a question, maybe it's in addition or an extra supplement to something you've already taught. If you've got that video library, and be like, hey, here's a great one. A lot of the videos that I create are all on communication and how to up-level communication skills, be better listeners, upsell while you're on a job, different things like that. And so when people have questions, I no longer have to do another training. I can just say, oh, here's the video, here's the link. And so it supplements what you're already teaching. So if you haven't started creating your own video collection, do it. If you need help, any phone can record what you're doing. So get a tripod, set your phone up and record it. If you need help, ask a Gen Z. They will help you do this.
Let your class build them.
Yes, absolutely. And they can do the coolest things with videos that I don't know how to do. It's easy for them. This is their world. This is their life. So that's another way to connect with your students, and have them help you out with this if you need some help.
Yeah, they'll be.
And we're talking about
very
these ways for Gen Z, but it's also a lot of people learn that way. I look at my viewers, my demographics, and my highest demographics are Gen X. That's my highest viewer. I'm targeting Gen Z and how I teach, but I'm
Mhm.
finding is people in my generation thought, man, that's a much more fun, interesting way to learn. I
Yep.
want to learn it that way. And then so Gen Z, unfortunately, is my smallest demographic that I'm trying to actually target. But once we realize that, hey, this is a much more fun way of learning, when we start taking stuff apart so that people can see what's going on inside, it builds that curiosity. And curiosity is one of the most powerful ways of learning. They want to know, how does this work? I want to see. And it's a great, powerful tool for all of the generations.
You're right. Yes,
Mhm.
absolutely.
Definitely. Okay, are we ready for the big struggle of the day? Okay, ready for the next one? This is now. I won't say this will be a struggle for everyone, but I will say most instructors that look like me are going to struggle with this next slide because all of us have. And it's one that we're never really taught as men. And it is key for communication with our younger generations. And I didn't realize the importance of this until I started diving deeper into it and actually did a course on it about validation. Angie and I kind of talked about this in a podcast that we did at the conference last year. And I encourage you all to check out that podcast. It was very enlightening because it strikes chords in my own perspective on communicating with people that I had never actually learned. It was a skill set that I had not learned called validation. And validation is a very interesting tool when used properly. Many of us as instructors are taught that you teach this and you do this. And we're not really taught that it's important to understand it when someone is not understanding the way you're delivering. What is it? In encouraging them with the things they're doing right, but also asking for the things that they're not understanding. And what we have to really think about is, and we all have witnessed the change in the way young people earn merit for developing, whether it's in sports or whether it's in education. That has taken a change in the last few decades. And it's a little bit more difficult for people to be individuals today than it has in the past. And many young people struggle with finding individuality and identity. And a very easy way to get into that barrier and to help understand that person is in the validation and encouraging them on the things that they are doing along the way. And it pushes them further than I feel my generation was. For many of us that grew up in the Generation X, if we did something well, maybe you got, all right, great. We were almost always told, but you can do better. And yes, that can be an important motivator if used in the right purpose, but if it's discouraging the person from doing better, it really doesn't work well with Gen Z and with Gen Alpha in particularly. And so validation is a whole new learning process for an educator. Even educators that have been in the classroom and worked with students for decades are struggling with understanding what that means and recognizing achievements in our younger generations, because it is more important to them in these last couple of generations than it has been in previous generations. Have either one of you experienced that?
Yeah,
Oh yeah.
absolutely. Go ahead, Ty.
I was going to say something that I've always done in classes: high fives when people are participating, even if they get a question wrong. It's like, I love that you're participating. And I had a student in one of the classes come through and is like, I didn't get a high five today, and it was that feeling acknowledged, feeling like they are somebody. And so sometimes it's hard. We get in a moment and we get to realize that if somebody's not getting that, how to go to them and say, hey, what's going on? Let's start building that rapport with them so that we can teach them. Somebody once told me, an instructor told me, that if they're not learning, you're not teaching.
Hmm.
And it's that simple, no matter all these things that we do. But if they're not actually learning, then we're just we're just there, we're existing. So it's a hard thing to do, to make sure that we're thinking about the other people's feelings, thinking about giving that reinforcement, that positivity, that the good job, to let them feel like, hey, I did something. And then that's that motivation to come back tomorrow.
Yeah, and I think saying like good job, we need to be aware of that too, because there is a whole Gen Y that got told good job for everything, and everyone gets
Everything.
a participation trophy, and everybody did a good job, and then when everyone's told they did a good job, it doesn't mean as much, right? Like, and it doesn't feel as specific to me when we're talking about connecting with them individually and celebrating them individually. It's like we have to be careful there. I once worked with a coach who was helping me as I was trying to improve my communication skills, and he said, never tell the people you're coaching good job, because it's almost like, okay, you've hit the finish line, you're there, right? But instead, what's an additional question you can get them or ask them to get them to think a little bit further, or to get them, without saying, okay, here's your reward, you're all done. I think instead of saying, just, hey, good job, you did it, it's like, I think you had a slide on this, but it's very specific to what did you like? What did they do well? Being very specific about the things that they have accomplished. I really like the way you analyze that. I like the way that you pulled that apart and how you explain that, or whatever that is. Being very specific with your feedback and what they've done well, I think is really, really awesome. And in addition, don't assume. When it comes time to give them feedback on what they can do to improve on something, don't assume that they don't understand it, or don't assume maybe
Right.
we just need to ask more questions and understand. It's it's especially with this younger generation, they pick up on a lot, and we can assume that they haven't got it just because they're doing it a different way than we learned it, or that we might show it. That's something that we might need to be careful as. Watch out for our assumptions there. One other thing is, watch out for sarcasm. I see a lot of sarcasm in classrooms, and even in our industry, people are trying to have fun, be funny, but sometimes sarcasm can really, I don't want to say we need to be like overly sensitive, but we think we're being funny, but it can really not be a positive way to validate them. We think we're being funny, we're connecting, but it really could harm that relationship and discredit everything we just did to try to validate them.
Yeah. It made so much sense when I started realizing what validation actually meant and what things it can remove. If we think about developing and the people that were around us that we considered mentors or peers, when those people pointed out our deficiencies or our inefficiencies, did it ever do us any good?
It makes you feel bad about yourself, right? You're like, okay, and so now I'm horrible at this, right?
Hmm.
It didn't make me feel good. I don't know about you, Ty.
No.
Well, I was thinking that it's just not just for the classroom, but also in the field. I
Hmm.
I hate it when somebody's like, "Well, you're just going to be a maintenance position," but that maintenance position is so important. What happens to equipment? We don't maintain it. Somebody's like, "Oh, we're just going to be changing filters." No, we need to celebrate that. It's like, this is an extremely important job. If we don't get these filters done right, it's going to damage the entire equipment. So if we start looking at that, of giving them the importance of this job, that way they're more excited about coming to it. Oh, you're just going to be a filter changer. Well, nobody wants to work. Well, of course not. That's not a job that sounds cool. It's like, look, we have this position and we need somebody to put these filters in, make sure that we air seal it, because this is the key for this equipment working well, for the longevity of the whole entire program, or installs. Hey, we have Mrs. Jones here, and Mrs. Jones is taking out a loan because they want a comfortable house. They've been dealing with this old piece of equipment for 20 years. The service guys have had nothing but having problems trying to keep this thing going. And now's the day that we can install this right, take care of this for Mrs. Jones. So she's going to have what you do today is going to be the next 10, maybe even 15, 20 years from now. So what you're going to do today is very important versus, yep, we got another install to do tomorrow. It's that how we present it. And then if you have a job that's important to you, you're much more likely to come to work. You're much more proud of what you do. And one thing that's good with the younger generations is they're on social media, but when they're making a video of what they're doing, they're proud of what they're doing. They're showing it to their friends and family. Look at what I'm doing. Look how important this is to me. And then also that shows how important the trade is to the entire world, that people get to see. I get people that watch videos that have no interest in the trade at all, but they're just fascinated that they had no clue so much went into HVAC. So when you get people showing it, they're proud of it. That's a win. They're showing the quality of work you do for the company. It's free advertising for the company. And you get to show the world, hey, this is a lot more technical than what people think. It's not just a labor job. It's a skilled job. And so I think that's a great thing. And if we start embracing that, and instead of saying, get off your phone, let's see, are we doing something productive? Are we using an app? Are we looking information up? I love now manuals, the installation manual. I can pull it up as a PDF and search for what I need instead of flipping through all the papers. And a lot of that's just a difference between having, what we had in the older days, the books, versus having it, the same book is right here on their phone. But celebrating those jobs like this, it is an important job. Why don't we just communicate that to them?
Absolutely. And that's a mindset, right? What you're teaching and communicating is helping them get that mindset of being proud to be in this industry. And, talking about it that way, not like I'm just an HVAC tech, but like, dude, you get to go change the weather in people's houses. You are creating humidity. You're changing, like it's what we do is amazing. And so to celebrate that and help them be proud of that, that's a great way to validate their choice and help them with the mindset. For sure.
I've also encountered instructors that struggle with allowing their students to do videos of what they're doing in class. And so that's one that you have to have conversation with your administration. But I've also seen some very interesting promotional videos of programs created by their students showing off how proud they are of their accomplishments in the classrooms. And you want to talk to an instructor that's proud of their class and a student that's proud of what they're learning. It didn't take very many Google searches before you find those videos, and you'll see how successful those programs are. All right, just a couple more minutes left. Like I said, I figured we probably wouldn't get through all of them. That was the one that I absolutely wanted to cover just because it is a very important topic. And I don't think I'm going to go through the rest of these. I had quite a few other steps that we could talk about for better communication, but I've got two fantastic communicators here. What other things would we like to cover, or important steps that we would like to discuss before we hop out of here for either one of you?
There are two books that I recommend. And of course, the younger generation, we're not going to be reading the books, but for everybody else, this one's called Unconformed. It's by my friend Brian Orr. And it's a great motivational book. It's easy to read. The text is spaced out. It's also available in audiobook. It's very affordable. But a lot of the stuff he talks about really helps naturally connect with other generations. Talks about being open-minded, respectfulness. So I highly recommend this book. It's very affordable. The second book that I recommend is Unlocking Gen Z by Hannah Grady Williams.
Absolutely.
This book is fantastic. If you really want to understand how to get your business to connect with the younger generation, use it in your classroom. Now, this is written for like corporate type work stuff, but there's so much in here that you can adapt to your classroom. You can adapt to tradespeople about using apprenticeship programs. And you can see I have all my tabs in it. I've made so many notes on this. I took a year studying Generation Z, and this book just really summed up all of the hard lessons that I learned. So I can't recommend either one of these books enough.
Fantastic.
I love that. Well, since you're recommending books, I will share one that was recently shared with me. It's called Surrounded by Idiots. And really, it really should, when we get used to our own way of thinking and our own perception, oftentimes we do think, oh my gosh, everyone else, it's because we're so focused on us that we're not open to learning and understanding others, not just generational differences, but some of the things we talked about on our podcast, people who are very extroverted versus introverted, and the best way to communicate with them, versus people who are very task focused or people focused. What are the best way to communicate with different types of communicators, and how to understand who you're communicating with? So that book is kind of a fun spin on that, to help you realize they might not be the idiots. It's more, what can we learn to improve our communication skills and be more aware of those around us so we can communicate effectively with them.
Yeah. Tell me about this podcast.
Well, it was the podcast you and I did.
Okay. I was making sure there wasn't another one out there. I was like, I know of a really good one, but I want to make sure she doesn't. And Howard put that in the chat.
Go ahead and click on that. I think we did talk a little bit about that there.
Absolutely. And so really what the conversation was about for today is understanding that communication really does start with us. And the world is evolving and changing at a very rapid pace. Technology is escalating. We have new refrigerants in our industry. We have a lot of technical things to learn. And so in that, we also have the responsibility of properly communicating that to different generations who have went through different transitions and changes with education than maybe we did. And so it's being more open to allowing ourselves to communicate in ways that might be a little uncomfortable for us, but will increase the way that is received. So that's all. A little different flavor for today, but I really enjoyed it. It wasn't as technical, it was more communication, and we don't dive deep enough into that. And so I really appreciate both of you joining us today.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Any questions, comments out there? Anyone ready to strangle our neck because we're trying to encourage you to step out of your comfort zone? And and that'd be quite all right. And so we look forward to seeing you all at the National HVACR Education Conference. We'll be spending time learning technical skills, but we'll also be learning these soft skills and communication skills. And so, Angie, I'm sure you're going to be there.
Yep, planning on it. Excited.
We're going to have so much fun.
Be sure and give us a thumbs up or a little heart, whichever social media platform you're on.
Think about that. All right, thank you all for joining us so much, and we'll see you again next week on Did You Know? The ESCO HVAC Show.